The woman's breath came in ragged gasps as she watched the last wagon disappear into the white curtain of falling snow. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would die here alone in the Wyoming wilderness. Amelia Vaughn had felt her ankle snap 3 days ago when she slipped on the ice-slicked rocks while gathering firewood, and despite her best efforts to hide the injury, the wagon master had made his decision that morning with cold practicality. They could not wait for her to heal. Winter in 1876 showed no mercy to those who delayed, and the train had already lost precious time to the early November storms. Her protests had fallen on deaf ears, and now she sat propped against a boulder with 2 days of hardtack, a blanket, and a promise that help might come from the next train through, though they both knew no other wagons would risk these mountain passes until spring. The cold bit through her wool coat and settled into her bones. Amelia pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to keep her injured foot elevated on her carpetbag. The ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin mottled purple and yellow. Every slight movement sent lightning bolts of agony up her leg. She was 22 years old, had survived the war as a child, buried both parents to cholera, and had been traveling west to start fresh as a schoolteacher in a mining town that now seemed as distant and unreachable as the moon itself. The snow fell harder as the afternoon light began to fade. Amelia knew she should try to fashion some kind of shelter, but the pain made even sitting upright an ordeal. She nibbled at the hardtack, forcing herself to eat though she had no appetite. The silence of the mountains pressed in around her, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines, and the soft hiss of snowflakes landing on the frozen ground. She must have dozed because she woke to near darkness and the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought it a dream or perhaps the beginning of the delirium that comes before freezing to death. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, accompanied now by the creak of leather and the jingle of bit and bridle. Amelia tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Here, I am here." The hoofbeats stopped. There was a moment of terrible silence when she feared she had imagined it all, and then a voice called back through the snow, "Keep talking, I will find you, here, behind the boulder, please." Her voice broke with relief and desperation. A horse emerged from the white curtain like a ghost, a big bay gelding with frost clinging to its whiskers. The rider sat tall in the saddle, a man in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. He dismounted in one fluid motion and hurried to her side, dropping to one knee. "Good Lord, what happened? Where is your party?" His voice carried genuine concern, not the judgment she had expected. "They left me. My ankle is broken. The wagon master said they could not wait." The words came out flat, emotionless. She had cried all her tears already. The man swore under his breath. Even in the failing light she could see the hard line of his jaw, the dark stubble that covered his cheeks. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, weathered by sun and wind in the way of men who lived their lives outdoors. His eyes, when they met hers, held both anger at her situation and something gentler that she could not quite name. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I do not know." "I can barely stand. We will make it work. There is a line shack about 5 miles south. We can shelter there tonight, and I will get you to Unionville in the morning." He stood and began securing his few supplies more tightly to his saddle. "I am Xavier Ashford. Most folks call me Zav." "Amelia Vaughn." She watched him work with quick, efficient movements. "I cannot thank you enough. Thank me when we are both warm and dry." He came back to her side and crouched down. "This is going to hurt. I am sorry for it, but there is no other way." Before she could brace herself, He had slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. The movement jolted her broken ankle, and she could not suppress a cry of pain. Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes and bit down hard on her lip. I know, Xav said softly. Just hold on. Almost there. He carried her to the horse and somehow managed to mount while holding her, settling into the saddle with Amelia cradled against his chest. She felt the solid warmth of him through their layers of clothing, the steady beat of his heart. He arranged the reins in one hand and kept his other arm secure around her waist. Hold tight now, he said. Keep your arms around my neck and try not to put any weight on that foot. Amelia wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder as the horse started forward. Each step sent jarring waves of pain through her ankle, but she gritted her teeth and remained silent. This man had saved her life. The least she could do was not complain about the discomfort of being rescued. They rode through the deepening darkness with snow swirling around them. Amelia had no idea how Xav could see where he was going, but the horse seemed sure-footed and confident. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, she saw a dark shape materialize ahead. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, a crude shelter used by cowboys watching over cattle in the summer months, but it looked like a palace to Amelia. Xav dismounted with care and carried her inside, settling her gently on the dirt floor. Stay put. I will get the horse taken care of and start a fire. Amelia leaned back against the rough log wall and listened to him move about outside, the sounds of him unsaddling the horse and presumably finding some kind of shelter for the animal. Then he was back, bringing in his saddlebags and bedroll along with some firewood that had been stacked inside to stay dry. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing in the crude stone fireplace. The light pushed back the shadows and revealed the full extent of the shack's humble accommodations. One room, perhaps 12 feet square, with nothing but a built-in bunk on one wall and a few hooks for hanging gear. But it was out of the wind and snow, and as the fire began to warm the space, Amelia felt hope kindle in her chest for the first time since the wagons had pulled away. Xav knelt beside her and carefully pulled off her boot. She gasped at the pain, but he worked quickly and gently. When he peeled back her stocking, they both saw how bad the ankle truly was. The swelling had increased and the bruising looked worse in the firelight. It is definitely broken, he said, but I think it is a clean break, no bone pushing through. That is good. He looked up at her face. I am going to splint it best I can. Do you have another petticoat I can tear up for bandages in my bag, the carpet bag that I had with me? I will get it. I left it by the horse. He disappeared back outside and returned a moment later with her bag. The snow had already crusted it with white. While he rummaged through her meager possessions, Amelia studied him more carefully in the firelight. He was indeed handsome in a rough-hewn way, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and strong features that spoke of determination and perhaps some hardship. His hands, when he pulled out her spare petticoat, were large and capable, but moved with surprising gentleness. He tore the fabric into strips without comment or embarrassment, as practical about it as if he were preparing bandages from any other cloth. Then he gathered some straight sticks from the woodpile and knelt before her again. This will hurt, he warned her. Might be you want to bite down on something. Just do it quickly. He nodded and positioned the sticks along either side of her ankle, then began wrapping the cloth strips tightly to hold them in place. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut and dug her fingernails into her palms, breathing through her nose as waves of agony rolled up her leg. But Xav worked with confident efficiency, and soon the makeshift splint was secure. That should hold until we can get you to a proper doctor, he said, sitting back on his heels. His forehead was damp with sweat despite the cold. "Now we should eat something and get some rest. It will be a hard ride tomorrow." He heated beans and salt pork in a small pan over the fire, and they ate directly from the pan, passing it back and forth. The food was simple but hot, and Amelia felt strength seeping back into her limbs. Xav also produced a battered tin cup and made coffee so strong she could almost chew it, but the warmth and the bitter taste were heavenly. "Where were you headed before you found me?" she asked. "Just drifting, mostly." "I have been working as a ranch hand down in Colorado, but the job ended with the season. Thought I might find winter work in one of the mining towns." He took a sip of coffee and stared into the fire. "Lucky I came this way, I suppose. Lucky for me, certainly." Amelia wrapped her cold hands around the warm cup. "I do not want to think about what would have happened if you had not." "Well, you do not have to think about it. You are safe now." He stood and unrolled his bedding, spreading it out near the fire. "You should sleep here where it is warm." "I will make do with my coat and the horse blanket." "I cannot take your bedroll." "You can and you will. You are injured and you have been through an ordeal. I will hear no arguments." The tone of his voice left no room for discussion. Amelia wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves. Xav helped her move onto the bedroll, arranging the blankets carefully around her and propping up her injured leg with his saddlebags. "Sleep now," he said softly. "We will talk more in the morning." He settled himself against the opposite wall, wrapped in his heavy coat with the horse blanket draped over his shoulders. The fire crackled between them, sending dancing shadows across the walls. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain that throbbed in her ankle, Amelia felt safe for the first time in days. She watched Xav's profile in the firelight until her eyes grew too heavy to keep open, and then she slept. She woke several times during the night, once to find Xav stoking the fire to keep it burning, once to the sound of wind howling around the shack. Each time she saw him still awake, keeping watch, making sure she was warm enough. In the early hours before dawn, when the cold was at its deepest, she heard him moving around and felt him spread his own coat over her blankets for extra warmth. Morning light filtered gray and pale through the cracks in the walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world muffled in white. Xav was already awake, heating more coffee over the rebuilt fire. "How is the ankle?" he asked when he saw her eyes open. "It hurts," she admitted, "but the splint helps." "Good. I am going to check on the horse and then we will head for Unionville. It is maybe 15 miles. If we take it slow, we should make it by late afternoon." They ate a spare breakfast of hardtack and jerky, and then Xav carried her back outside to his horse. The bay stamped and blew clouds of steam in the morning air, but stood steady as Xav mounted with Amelia once more in his arms. She settled against his chest, already learning the feel of riding this way, and they set off across the snow-covered landscape. The day was clear and bitterly cold, but without the wind and snow of the previous day, the journey was bearable. Xav kept the horse to a steady walk, mindful of Amelia's injury. They spoke little, saving their energy, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. Amelia found herself very aware of his presence, the way his arm held her secure, the rise and fall of his chest with each breath, the faint scent of horse and leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. She knew she should not be thinking such things about a man she had just met, a man who was simply helping her out of Christian duty. But there was something about Xavier Ashford that called to something deep inside her. Perhaps it was simply gratitude coloring her perception. Perhaps it was the vulnerability of her situation making her feel things that were not real. She tried to convince herself of these rational explanations, but her heart was not listening to her head. They stopped once at midday to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Xav helped Amelia down and she tried to stand, but the moment she put any weight on her broken ankle, her leg buckled. He caught her before she fell. "Easy now. You will not be walking on that for quite a while." "I hate being helpless," she said with feeling. "You are not helpless. You are hurt." "There is a difference." He eased her down to sit on a fallen log. "You survived being abandoned in a snowstorm. That takes strength." "I did not have much choice." "There is always a choice. You could have given up. Instead, you stayed alive long enough for help to arrive." He crouched in front of her, his eyes serious. "That counts for something." Amelia felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything. I know you did not have to stop. Many men would have ridden right past." "Then many men are fools." He said it simply, as though it were obvious fact. "Come on. Let us get you to town before we both freeze solid." They rode on through the afternoon, and as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they crested a rise, and Amelia saw Unionville spread out below them. The town was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, several side streets branching off, and what looked like a church steeple rising above the other structures. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, promising warmth and civilization. Xav guided the horse down the slope and into town. People turned to stare as they passed, a man and woman riding double, the woman clearly injured. Xav ignored the curious looks and stopped in front of a building with a sign that read, "Dr. Samuel Winters, Physician." He dismounted and lifted Amelia down, then carried her up the steps and through the door. A bell chimed overhead. They found themselves in a small waiting room with several wooden chairs and a desk where a middle-aged woman sat doing paperwork. "We need the doctor," Xav said. "She has a broken ankle." The woman stood immediately. "Bring her right through. The doctor is just finishing with another patient." She led them into an examination room where Xav carefully set Amelia on the padded table. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Winters, the doctor's wife, began asking questions about how the injury had occurred and how long ago. Amelia answered as best she could, still feeling somewhat dazed by the sudden transition from wilderness to civilization. Dr. Winters appeared a few minutes later, a spare man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and gentle hands. He examined Amelia's ankle carefully, asking her to describe the pain and testing the range of motion. Then he looked up at Xav. "You did a fine job with this splint. Probably saved her a lot of additional damage. The break is clean, just as you thought. She will need to stay off it completely for at least 6 weeks, and even then she will need to be careful for several months." He began removing the makeshift splint to replace it with a proper plaster cast. "She is lucky you found her when you did." "I know," Amelia said quietly. The doctor worked efficiently, and soon her lower leg was encased in a proper cast. Mrs. Winters brought her a pair of crutches and helped her practice moving around the room. The relief of having professional medical care was enormous, but it also brought a new worry to the forefront of Amelia's mind. She had very little money, barely enough for 2 weeks' lodging and meals even if she found the cheapest boarding house in town. And now she could not work for at least 6 weeks. When the doctor named his fee, she felt her stomach sink. It was reasonable, but it would take nearly half of what she had left. "I can pay you," she said, reaching for her small purse. "But I will need to know where I might find inexpensive lodging. And perhaps you know if anyone in town needs help with work I could do while sitting down. Sewing or mending, perhaps." Dr. Winters and his wife exchanged glances. Before either could speak, Xav stepped forward. "Actually, I may have a solution," he said, "if Miss Vaughn is willing." Amelia looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" The boarding house on Maple Street is run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She is a good woman, and I know she has been looking for help. Her daughter just got married and moved away, and she has been struggling to keep up with all the work of running the place alone. He met Amelia's eyes. Room and board in exchange for whatever help you can provide. Cooking, mending, keeping the books. Things you can do sitting down until your ankle heals. How do you know all this? Amelia asked. I have stayed at her place before when passing through. She mentioned her situation last time I was here, back in September. He shrugged. It might work out well for both of you. That is actually a wonderful idea, Mrs. Winters said. Martha Patterson is a dear friend of mine, and I know she would be delighted to have the help. And she would treat you kindly, Miss Vaughn. You could not ask for a better situation. Amelia felt overwhelmed by this sudden turn of fortune. I do not know what to say. Say you will at least meet her and see if it suits you both, Xav said. I can take you there now if you like. Yes, Amelia said. Yes, I would like that very much. After paying the doctor and promising to return in a week for a follow-up examination, they left the office. Xav helped Amelia onto his horse once more, though this time she sat properly in the saddle with him mounted behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. The crutches were tied to the saddle. The boarding house was only a few blocks away, a substantial two-story house painted white with green shutters and a wide front porch. Mrs. Patterson answered the door herself, a plump woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face lit up when she saw Xav. Xavier Ashford. What a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you the other day, wondering if you would be coming through before winter set in proper. Then she noticed Amelia and her expression shifted to concern. Oh my, what happened to you, dear? Between them, Xav and Amelia explained the situation. Mrs. Patterson listened with growing distress, particularly when she heard about the wagon train leaving Amelia behind. When they reached the part about Xav's proposal for an arrangement between the two women, Mrs. Patterson clasped her hands together. Oh, what a perfect solution. Yes, absolutely yes. I would be delighted to have you, Miss Vaughn, and you would be doing me such a favor, truly. I have been at my wits' end trying to manage everything alone. She stepped back and gestured them inside. Come in, come in. Let me show you the room. Xavier, help her up the stairs, would you? The house was warm and welcoming, furnished with comfortable furniture that showed signs of wear but was scrupulously clean. The smell of baking bread wafted from somewhere in the back. Mrs. Patterson led them upstairs, chattering all the way about the house and her boarders and how glad she was for this arrangement. The room she showed them was small but charming, with a single bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a washstand, a wear-worn dresser, and a rocking chair by the window that looked out over the side garden. Lace curtains filtered the afternoon light into something soft and golden. It is perfect, Amelia said, tears stinging her eyes. More than perfect. Thank you so much, Mrs. Patterson. Oh, pish, you are doing me the favor, dear. Now, Xavier, bring her things up when you get a chance. Amelia, you just rest for now. Dinner is at 6. We keep a good table here, and I expect you to eat well and get your strength back. She bustled toward the door, then paused. Will you be staying for supper too, Xavier? You are more than welcome. I would be grateful for a hot meal, yes, madam, Xav said. And I was hoping you might have a room available for a few days. I could use a warm bed and a chance to rest my horse before moving on. Of course, your regular room is empty. Consider it yours for as long as you need. Mrs. Patterson beamed at them both and hurried out, closing the door behind her. Suddenly alone together in the small bedroom, Amelia became acutely aware of the intimate nature of the situation. Xav seemed to sense her discomfort and took a step back toward the door. "I will go fetch your carpet bag and take care of the horse," he said. "You should rest before dinner." "Xav." She stopped him before he could leave. "I cannot ever repay you for what you have done. You saved my life, and now you have found me a place to stay and a way to support myself." "I do not have words for what that means." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "You do not owe me anything, Amelia. I did what anyone decent would do." "We both know that is not true. The wagon master who left me, he was not a cruel man by nature. He was simply practical. He made the decision he thought was right for the greater good. You could have done the same, ridden past, told yourself someone else would help, but you did not." "No," he agreed quietly. "I did not." He cleared his throat. "Rest now. I will see you at dinner." He left before she could say anything else. Amelia lowered herself carefully onto the bed, propping her casted leg on a pillow. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed and strangely elated all at once. In the span of 24 hours she had gone from certain death to safety, from despair to hope. And at the center of that transformation was a dark-haired cowboy who asked nothing in return for his kindness. She told herself not to read too much into her feelings. Gratitude and attraction could easily be confused. She had been vulnerable and frightened, and he had been strong and capable. It was natural that she would feel drawn to him. It did not mean anything deeper. It could not mean anything deeper. He had said himself that he was just passing through. In a few days he would move on to wherever he was going, and she would likely never see him again. The thought created an ache in her chest that she did not want to examine too closely. Amelia must have dozed because she woke to a gentle knock on her door, and Mrs. Patterson calling that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. She used the wash basin to freshen up as best she could, wishing she had better clothes than her worn traveling dress. But there was nothing to be done about it now. She managed to navigate the stairs with the crutches, though it was awkward and slow, and found her way to the dining room. The room held a long table set for 8. 3 other boarders were already seated, 2 men who looked like miners or prospectors, and an older gentleman in a shopkeeper's apron. They introduced themselves as Carl, James, and Mr. Hendricks respectively, and all were curious about the newest resident. Xav arrived moments later, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He took the seat next to Amelia without comment, but she felt her pulse quicken at his nearness. Mrs. Patterson served a hearty meal of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and fresh baked bread, followed by apple pie for dessert. The food was delicious and plentiful. The conversation around the table was friendly and wide-ranging, touching on everything from the recent presidential election to the weather to the latest news from the mines. Amelia mostly listened, content to let the normalcy of it all wash over her. After dinner, the men retired to the parlor to smoke and play cards. Mrs. Patterson shooed Amelia toward the kitchen. "Come sit and talk with me while I do the dishes," she said. "I want to hear your whole story, dear, and we can discuss what help you will be able to provide." They spent the next hour in comfortable conversation. Amelia found herself telling Mrs. Patterson things she had not planned to share, about losing her parents, about her hopes of becoming a teacher, about the loneliness of the wagon train and the terror of being left behind. The older woman listened with genuine compassion, occasionally reaching over to pat Amelia's hand. In return, Mrs. Patterson told her about the boarding house, about her late husband who had been the sheriff until he died of a heart attack 3 years ago, about her daughter who now lived on a ranch 20 miles away. They discussed Amelia's duties, which would indeed be mostly things she could do while sitting, like mending linens, helping with meal planning and cooking, keeping the household accounts, and supervising the weekly laundry since Mrs. Patterson hired a woman to do the actual washing. "It sounds perfect," Amelia said. "I promise I will work hard. I will earn my keep." "Oh, I know you will, dear. I am an excellent judge of character, and I can see you are a good girl who has had some bad luck. We will get along just fine." When they returned to the parlor, they found the card game breaking up. The older gentleman had already retired upstairs, and Carl and James were heading out for an evening at the saloon. Xav stood by the window, looking out at the dark street. He turned when they entered. "I should let you rest," he said to Amelia. "It has been a long 2 days." "It has," she agreed. Something in her chest tightened at the thought of him leaving, even just to go to his own room. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "I will. I need to give my horse a proper rest before we go anywhere." He hesitated. "Would you like to take breakfast together? If Mrs. Patterson does not mind, that is." "Of course I do not mind," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "I serve breakfast at 7, but I can have something ready earlier or later if that suits you better." "7 is fine," Amelia said, looking at Xav. "I will see you then." He nodded and said his goodnights, heading upstairs to his room. Mrs. Patterson helped Amelia up the stairs as well, making sure she could manage, and saw her settled in her room before bidding her goodnight. Alone again, Amelia changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, performing the familiar nighttime rituals by the light of the oil lamp. Her ankle throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but the pain was manageable. As she climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she found herself thinking about Xav in his room just down the hall. Was he thinking about her too? Or had he already dismissed her from his mind? Just another stranger he had helped along the way. She fell asleep, still wondering. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Amelia woke early, her body still accustomed to the schedule of wagon train life where everyone rose with the sun. She dressed carefully, choosing her least worn dress, and did her best with her hair, pinning it up in a simple style. Using the crutches, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson already bustling around the kitchen. "Good morning, dear." "My, you are up early, I like that. Here, sit at the work table and you can help me by peeling these potatoes for tonight's stew." Amelia was happy to have something useful to do. She sat and peeled potatoes while Mrs. Patterson mixed biscuit dough and fried bacon. They chatted easily about nothing in particular, and Amelia felt a sense of contentment stealing over her. This was good. This would work. She could be happy here, at least for a while. Xav appeared just before 7, looking well-rested. He smiled when he saw Amelia already in the kitchen. "You are an early riser," he observed. "Old habits," she said. "On the wagon train we would have been on the road for 2 hours already by now." They ate breakfast in the dining room with the other boarders, the same hearty food that seemed to be Mrs. Patterson's trademark. Afterward, Xav asked if Amelia would like to sit on the front porch for a while, since the morning sun was warming things up nicely. She agreed readily, and he helped her outside, bringing the rocking chair from her room for her to sit in. The morning was indeed beautiful, the sun sparkling on the snow and the air crisp and clean. Xav leaned against the porch railing, his eyes scanning the street with the habitual wariness of a man accustomed to watching his surroundings. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks, honestly. That bed is heaven compared to sleeping on the ground." She adjusted her casted leg, trying to find a comfortable position. "What about you?" "Same. I had forgotten how nice a real mattress could be." They fell into comfortable conversation, talking about small things at first. He told her about his life as a ranch hand, the freedom and the hardship of it. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about teaching herself to read from her mother's books, about her dream of educating children on the frontier. "You will make a fine teacher," he said. "I can tell you have the patience for it. I hope I still have the chance. The school that hired me is in South Pass City. That is another 50 miles west of here. I was supposed to arrive by the 1st of December to start after the new year. You can still make it. Once your ankle has healed enough, you can take the stagecoach. It runs twice weekly from here to South Pass City." "If I can afford the fare by then," Amelia said. "I will have to save what little money I have left." Xav frowned. "Did the wagon master give you no refund when he left you behind?" "You paid for passage all the way to South Pass City. He said he could not afford to give refunds. He had already spent the money on supplies." She shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "It does not matter now. I will make it work somehow." "It does matter. That was wrong of him." Xav's voice held an edge of anger. "You should not have to suffer twice for his decision. There is nothing to be done about it now. He is long gone." "Maybe." Xav pushed off from the railing. "I think I will take a walk around town, see if anyone needs temporary work. Will you be all right here?" "Of course. Mrs. Patterson will probably find something for me to do." He left, and Amelia watched him stride down the street, his long legs eating up the distance. She told herself she should not stare, but she could not seem to help it. There was something magnetic about Xavier Ashford, something that drew her eye and her thoughts regardless of her better judgment. Mrs. Patterson found her a short while later and put her to work in the parlor, mending linens while sitting in a comfortable chair by the fire. It was pleasant work, meditative, and Amelia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. The other boarders came and went, and Mrs. Patterson brought her tea and cookies at mid-morning. Xav returned around noon, looking satisfied. "The general store needs help with inventory and stocking shelves," he said. "The owner is willing to pay decent wages for 2 weeks' work. That will give me enough to get through the winter if I am careful. So you are staying in Unionville?" Amelia tried to keep her voice neutral, but her heart had leapt at his words. For a while, anyway. No sense heading further into the mountains with winter setting in proper. He dropped into the chair across from her. "Mrs. Patterson said I could keep my room here if I help out with some of the heavier work she needs done. Repairs and such. Seems like a fair arrangement." "That sounds wonderful," Amelia said, and meant it more than she could express. Over the following days, they fell into a comfortable routine. Xav worked at the general store during the day while Amelia helped Mrs. Patterson with the boarding house. In the evenings, they would sit together in the parlor, sometimes talking, sometimes reading quietly, sometimes just enjoying each other's company in companionable silence. Amelia learned that he had grown up on a farm in Kansas, that he had left home at 18 after his parents died, that he had been drifting ever since, working where he could and moving on when the urge struck him. He learned about her childhood, her love of books and learning, her dreams of making a difference in the world by teaching children who might otherwise never learn to read. The more time they spent together, the harder it became for Amelia to deny the depth of her feelings. She found herself waiting for the sound of his footsteps on the porch each evening. Her heart would lift when he smiled at her. She treasured their conversations, the way he listened to her opinions and treated her ideas with respect. She caught herself watching his hands as he whittled small figurines from scraps of wood in the evenings, fascinated by the deftness of his long fingers. She tried to remind herself that this was temporary. He was a drifter by nature. When spring came, he would move on. She would recover from her injury and make her way to South Pass City to take up her teaching position. Their paths had crossed by accident, and they would diverge again just as randomly. It would be foolish to let herself fall in love. But her heart, it seemed, had not consulted her head about the matter. One evening about 2 weeks after they had arrived in Unionville, they sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The other boarders had gone to bed early, and Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen preparing dough for the next day's bread. They had the night to themselves. "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course." "Why did you stop? That day in the snow? You could have just kept riding. You said yourself you were heading to find work. I must have slowed you down considerably." Xav was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "I suppose I could have, but the truth is, I never even considered it. I heard you call out and I knew someone needed help. There was not any real decision to make. Most people are not like that. Most people would have at least hesitated, weighed the cost to themselves. Maybe. But I was raised to believe that when you have the power to help someone, you have the responsibility to do it. My parents were good people, hard-working, generous to a fault. They taught me that character is shown in what you do when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain for yourself." He looked over at her, his eyes dark in the shadows. "Besides, I am glad I stopped. I am glad I found you." Amelia's breath caught. "I am glad, too," she whispered. The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken things. Xav reached over and took her hand in his palm warm and slightly rough with calluses. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands and watching the stars, not needing words. From that night forward, something shifted between them. The attraction that had been simmering under the surface became harder to ignore. They found excuses to touch, a hand on an arm, a shoulder brushing in passing. Their eyes would meet across the dinner table and hold just a moment too long. The other boarders began to notice and smile knowingly. Mrs. Patterson, with the romantic heart of a matchmaker, made sure to leave them alone together whenever possible. One snowy afternoon, when the boarding house was quiet and Xav had come home early from the general store, they found themselves alone in the parlor. Amelia was mending by the fire as usual, and Xav settled into the chair beside her with a book. But neither of them could seem to focus on their tasks. Finally, Xav set the book aside. "Amelia, I need to talk to you about something." The seriousness in his tone made her set down her mending. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about the future, about what happens when winter ends." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "The truth is, I do not want to leave, not if it means leaving you." Amelia's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. I wake up looking forward to the day because I know I will see you. I go to sleep thinking about our conversations. You have become important to me, Amelia. More important than I ever intended to let anyone become." Xav. She hardly dared to breathe. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I am just a drifter with no real prospects, no land, no money to speak of. You are an educated woman with a profession waiting for you, but I cannot let you go without telling you how I feel." He looked up at her, his eyes intense. "I am falling in love with you, Amelia. Maybe I have been since the moment I found you in the snow. I do not know. All I know is that I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears sprang to Amelia's eyes. "Oh, Xav. I have been so afraid to say anything, so afraid you would think I was just confused, that what I felt was only gratitude." "And is it? Only gratitude?" "No." She reached out and cupped his face in her hand, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. "It is so much more than that. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first night in the line shack, watching you take care of everything, keeping me safe. You are the best man I have ever known, Xavier Ashford, and I cannot imagine my life without you either." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun coming out. He surged forward and captured her lips with his, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. Amelia kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xav rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know I should wait and court you properly. But life is uncertain and time is precious, and I do not want to waste a single moment. Marry me, Amelia." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and full of promise, when Mrs. Patterson bustled into the parlor a few minutes later and found them embracing by the fire. She let out a delighted squeal and immediately began planning the wedding. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the hill, with Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Winters and his wife as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but to Amelia it was perfect. She wore a borrowed dress that Mrs. Winters had kept from her own wedding, altered to fit. Xav wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her face. When they spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other until death, Amelia felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson hosted a small celebration at the boarding house. She had baked a cake and prepared a feast, and several townspeople stopped by to offer their congratulations. It was joyful and warm, and when evening came and the guests finally departed, Xav carried Amelia up the stairs to the room that was now theirs, her cast making it too difficult to manage the stairs on her own even with crutches. He set her gently on the bed and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "Are you?" "More than I can say." He kissed her hands, then her lips, soft and sweet. "I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I could never regret choosing you, Xav. Never." That night they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, whispering words of love in the darkness. Amelia had never imagined that physical intimacy could be so overwhelming, so deeply connecting. When she finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. The winter months passed in a haze of happiness. Amelia's ankle healed slowly but surely, and by February she was able to walk with only a slight limp. Xav continued working at the general store, and the owner was so pleased with his work that he offered to make him a permanent partner in the business. After much discussion, they decided to accept the offer. It would mean staying in Unionville permanently, which meant Amelia would not be able to take the teaching position in South Pass City, but she found she did not mind. Her life was here now with Xav. Instead, she approached the town council about starting a school in Unionville. The town had been growing rapidly with the mining boom, and many families had children who needed education. The council agreed enthusiastically and allocated a small building that had formerly been a storage shed. Xav and some of the other men in town spent their evenings fixing it up, building desks and shelves, whitewashing the walls. By April, the Unionville school was ready to open, and Amelia found herself standing before a classroom of 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Teaching was everything she had dreamed it would be. The children were eager to learn, and she loved watching their faces light up when they mastered a new concept. In the evenings, she would tell Xav about her day, about little Charlie, who had finally learned to read his first sentence, about Mary, who showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics, about the twins who could not seem to sit still for more than 5 minutes at a time. He would listen with genuine interest and offer suggestions, and she fell in love with him a little more each day. That summer they bought a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but theirs. They spent happy hours fixing it up, painting and hanging curtains and planting a garden. Xav built furniture in the evenings, crafting a beautiful headboard for their bed and a rocking chair for the front porch. Amelia sewed curtains and quilts, making their house a home. In September, Amelia realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was simply stress or perhaps the change in seasons, but when a second month passed, she went to see Dr. Winters. He confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was pregnant. She told Xav that evening as they sat together on their front porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He was silent for a long moment after she spoke, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A baby, Amelia." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. They had never really discussed children, though she had always assumed they would have them eventually. "Happy." "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. This is really happening. We are going to be parents." "Yes, we are." She leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and loved and so very blessed. "I hope I will be a good mother. You will be an amazing mother. You are patient and kind and you love children. Our child will be so lucky to have you." He kissed the top of her head. "We will figure it all out together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Amelia continued teaching until December, when her growing belly made it difficult to move around the classroom comfortably. The town council hired a temporary teacher to finish out the school year, with the understanding that Amelia would return after the baby was born. She spent the winter months preparing for their child's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets while Xav built a cradle from beautiful oak wood. Their son was born on a snowy night in March, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, but Dr. Winters and Mrs. Winters were there to help. And when Amelia finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Xav was at her side through it all, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement. They named him James Daniel Ashford, and he was perfect. 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair like his father's, and lungs that could wake the entire neighborhood. Amelia had never known she could love someone so fiercely, so completely. Watching Xav hold their son for the first time, seeing the wonder and tenderness in his eyes, made her fall in love with him all over again. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. They took turns walking James when he fussed at night, learning his cries and his needs. Amelia marveled at how naturally Xav took to fatherhood, how gentle he was despite his size and strength, how he could soothe their son when nothing else worked. When James was 3 months old, Amelia returned to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Patterson happily volunteering to watch the baby during school hours. It was a good arrangement that benefited everyone. Amelia loved her work, but also cherished her time with her son. The days were full and busy, but she would not have changed a single thing. As the years passed, their little family grew and flourished. Amelia gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah 2 years after James, and then another son named Thomas 3 years after that. Their house rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Xav's partnership in the general store prospered, and they were able to expand the business and hire additional help. Amelia's school grew as well, eventually requiring a second teacher. The town council built a proper school building, larger and better equipped. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when money was tight. There were illnesses that frightened them, though thankfully all passed without lasting harm. There were the normal stresses of raising children and running businesses and maintaining a household. But through it all, Amelia and Xav faced everything together. their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. One evening, when they had been married for nearly 10 years, they sat together on their front porch as they had done so many times before. The children were finally asleep after a long day of playing in the summer sun. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of Amelia's flower garden. Fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. "You ever think about that day?" Amelia asked. "The day you found me in the snow, often," Xav admitted. "I think about how close I came to taking a different route, how if I had left town even a few hours earlier or later, I might have missed you entirely. It is strange how one moment can change everything. If my ankle had not broken, if the wagon master had not left me behind, if you had not come along when you did." She shook her head. "So many things had to happen exactly as they did for us to find each other. Maybe it was fate. Maybe we were always meant to find each other one way or another." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I do not much believe in divine providence, but I have to think something larger than chance brought us together. I was lost before you, Amelia, drifting through life with no real purpose. You gave me a home, a reason to stay in one place, a future worth building. You did the same for me," she said softly. "I thought I knew what I wanted from life, a teaching position, independence, respect, but what I really needed was love, partnership, someone to build a life with. You gave me all of that and so much more." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars they had watched together on so many nights. 3 children slept safely in their beds inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight, there was only this moment, this perfect peace. "I would go through it all again," Amelia said. "The broken ankle being left behind, the fear and pain. I would endure it all again just to have this life with you." Xav lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "As would I. Every hardship, every struggle, it was all worth it to find you." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new experiences and adventures. James grew into a serious young man who loved books as much as his mother and took naturally to business like his father. He eventually went east to attend college, the first in their family to do so, and returned with plans to become a lawyer. Sarah proved to be musically gifted, with a voice like an angel. She gave concerts in the church and eventually opened a small music school of her own. Thomas was the wild one, adventurous and fearless, always getting into scrapes, but with such an infectious joy for life that no one could stay angry with him for long. He became a surveyor, mapping the expanding frontier. Amelia continued teaching for 25 years before finally retiring. She had educated hundreds of children over the course of her career, many of whom went on to become doctors, teachers, business owners, and civic leaders. The town held a celebration in her honor when she retired, and the new school building was named the Vaughn Ashford School in recognition of her contributions. Xav eventually sold his share of the general store to his partner and spent his later years working with his hands, building furniture and crafting beautiful items from wood. His pieces became sought after throughout Wyoming and neighboring territories, and he took great pride in creating things that would last for generations. They became grandparents, and then great-grandparents. Their home was always full of family on holidays and special occasions. Amelia would cook enormous meals while Xav entertained the children with stories of the old days. They watched Unionville grow from a rough mining town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. The wild frontier they had known gradually became civilized, though the mountains around them remained as majestic and untamed as ever. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out for the celebration. Their children and grandchildren came from all over, filling the house and spilling into the yard. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had departed and only family remained, James stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what true love looks like, who showed us that commitment and partnership can weather any storm, who built not just a family but a legacy. May we all be so fortunate in our own lives." "Hear, hear," chorused the assembled family, and Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, she and Xav prepared for sleep with the comfortable ease of 50 years together. Amelia sat at her vanity, brushing her silver hair. Xav watched her from the bed, his own hair white now, his face lined with the evidence of decades lived fully. "What are you thinking?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "That you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, that I am the luckiest man who ever lived. That 50 years with you has not been nearly enough." She set down her brush and came to sit beside him on the bed. "We still have time, my love. Many more years together, I hope. As many as the good Lord grants us." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "And when our time comes, I hope we go together. I cannot imagine this world without you in it, nor I without you." She leaned against his shoulder, fitting into the curve of his body as naturally as breathing. "Whatever happens, we face it together. We always have." They lived for many more years, remaining sharp and active well into their 70s. But eventually, as happens to everyone, time began to take its toll. Xav developed a persistent cough that turned out to be pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctors, his lungs never fully recovered. He spent his last months at home, surrounded by family, content, and at peace with his life. On a warm spring afternoon, with apple blossoms blooming outside the window and Amelia holding his hand, Xavier Ashford passed quietly from the world. He was 78 years old. His last words were, "I love you." Amelia held him and wept, her heart breaking even as she gave thanks for the extraordinary gift of their life together. She had known this day would come eventually, but knowing did nothing to ease the pain of loss. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Xav had touched. Former students, business associates, friends, and neighbors all came to pay their respects. Amelia sat surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, taking comfort in the family they had built together. She knew Xav would live on in all of them, in their values and their choices, in the ways they treated others with kindness and integrity. After the funeral, Amelia moved in with Sarah and her family. She could have stayed in the house she and Xav had shared, but it felt too empty without him. She brought only a few precious items: their wedding photograph, the quilt they had slept under for 50 years, the rocking chair Xav had made when she was pregnant with James. The grief was profound, but so too was the gratitude. She had been blessed beyond measure. So many people lived their entire lives without experiencing the kind of love she and Xav had shared. They had been true partners in every sense of the word, building a life and a family together, supporting each other through every challenge, celebrating every triumph together. She lived for 2 more years after Xav's death, years filled with family and memories. She spent her days reading and sewing and playing with her great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the day he found her in the snow, about their wedding, about all the adventures they had shared. She wanted them to know the kind of man he had been, the kind of love that was possible. On a cold winter evening, exactly 52 years after that fateful day when a cowboy had pulled her onto his horse and said, "Hold tight now," Amelia Vaughn Ashford passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 76 years old. Her last thought was of Xav, and she smiled. They buried her beside her husband in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Unionville. The headstone read, Xavier Ashford, 1850–1928, Amelia Vaughn Ashford, 1852–1928. Together forever their children stood at the graveside with tears streaming down their faces, but their hearts were full. Their parents had shown them how to love, how to build a life worth living, how to face adversity with courage and grace. That legacy would continue through generations to come. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story of how Amelia and Xav had met. It became family legend, passed down through the generations. The tale of a woman left behind in the snow and a cowboy who could not ride past someone in need. A story of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, of two souls who recognized each other and chose to build a life together. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings. And in Unionville, Wyoming, where their story began, the Vaughn Ashford School still stood. Generations of children walked through its doors to learn reading and writing and arithmetic, never knowing that it was named for a woman who had once been left for dead in the snow, and the man who saved her. But the building stood as testament to their legacy, to the impact two people could have when they chose love and commitment and partnership. Their house still stood too, carefully preserved by the Historical Society. Tourists would visit and walk through the rooms where Amelia and Xav had raised their children, where they had laughed and loved and built their life together. They would see the furniture Xav had made with his own hands, the quilts Amelia had sewn, the photographs on the walls documenting 52 years of marriage, and sometimes, on quiet winter evenings when snow fell softly outside, people claimed you could feel their presence in that old house. Not haunting it, but simply there, together as they had always been. Because a love like theirs does not end with death. It echoes through time, touching lives, inspiring others, reminding the world that true love is worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth holding on to with both hands and never letting go. The story of Amelia and Xavier Ashford became more than just their story. It became a symbol of hope and resilience, of the power of kindness and the redemptive nature of love. In a harsh world, in a difficult time, they had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful together. And that choice, made on a snowy day in 1876 when a cowboy stopped to help a stranger in need, rippled forward through time, touching countless lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Because in the end, that is what love does. It creates ripples. It builds bridges. It lights candles in the darkness that continue to burn long after we are gone. Amelia and Xav had lit such a candle with their love, and it burned still, warming all who came near it, reminding them that even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest moment, hope remains. Love endures. And sometimes, when we least expect it, a stranger comes riding out of the snow to change our lives forever. Their children grew old and passed away in turn, as did their grandchildren eventually. But the story remained, told and retold, never forgotten. The family tree branched and spread, carrying the blood of Amelia and Xavier Ashford across the country and eventually around the world. Each generation added their own chapters, their own love stories, their own triumphs and challenges. But they all traced back to that moment in 1876 when everything changed. And so the story ends where it began, with a woman alone in the snow and a man who chose to stop, with a simple act of kindness that became the foundation of a great love. With two people who faced an uncertain future and decided to face it together. With a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through the ages, reminding us all that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, is worth holding on to with both hands and never, ever letting go. "Hold tight now," Xav had said that first day, and Amelia had held tight indeed. Through 52 years of marriage, through joy and sorrow, through every challenge life threw at them, they had held tight to each other. And in doing so, they had created something timeless, something beautiful, something that would live on long after they were gone. That is the power of love. That is the legacy of Amelia and Xavier Ashford. And that is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating now and forever.